Abba dabba, ooga booga, hoogie googie, yabba dabba doo. Stupidity, ignorance, and nonsense as tools for nurturing creative thinking. This is a box. And today, more and more people discuss about how much important it is to be able to think out of it. This is also known as creative or design thinking. As any parent knows, young children do not need to be taught how to think out of the box. They already do it all of the time with tremendous success. Actually, young children do not know how not to think out of the box. This is probably just because the box does not exist. If you search Amazon for books related to creative thinking, you will get something more than 30,000 results. Still, in spite of this abundance of approaches and information related to creativity, there are 3 human traits that have been completely overlooked, although if cautiously used, can considerably contribute to the creative process. These traits are stupidity, ignorance, and nonsense, or SIN for short. At this point, I would like to clarify that the goal of this presentation is not to try to make you change your way of thinking, but rather to make you think about the way you're thinking. Back in 1997, during one of the chess games between IBM's Deep Blue versus the world chess champion Garry Kasparov, the computer made an unexpected move that surprised Kasparov and eventually led to his defeat. As it was recently revealed, this move was nothing more than a bug. The computer, unable to select a move, thus being in an ignorant state, did not use its artificial intelligence, thus it became stupid, and picked a play at random. In other words, it played nonsense. Thus, this historical moment that was heralded as one of the first triumphs of machine over human intelligence turned out to be nothing more than yet another victory of the combined forces of stupidity, ignorance, and nonsense. Our everyday lives are full of nonsense. Actually, there is so much of it that we rarely even notice. For example, in June 2010, about half the Earth's population spent at least 1 minute of their lives watching 22 grown-up guys kicking an inflated piece of plastic. It was called the 2010 FIFA World Cup South Africa. In fact, nonsense constitutes the very essence of our lives, as we still don't have a clue about what is the actual meaning of it. Gestalt psychology, which is epitomized by the phrase, "the whole is different than the sum of its parts," has devised a number of laws that the human mind follows in order to make sense out of nonsense. Here, you see an example of the law of closure, according to which objects close to each other are interpreted as a whole. In fairy tales, magic words are often pure nonsense, like for example abracadabra, alakazam, or the more imaginative abba dabba, ooga booga, hoogie googie, yabba dabba doo. This is not by chance. Nonsense is far more powerful than sense, mainly because it can take any meaning, thus leaving a window open for imagination to sneak in. When a magic word is even partially meaningful, its powers automatically diminish. For example, open sesame can only be used to open a thief's cave or maybe the entrance of a smart home. Nonsense has also the power to provide solutions where logic fails. In these 2 poker hands, common sense suggests that there cannot be a single card which can concurrently result in a straight flush and a 4 of a kind. But by the end of the 19th century, a nonsense card was introduced that became known as joker or wild card, which is allowed to be interpreted as any other existing card. So, it's time for some practical advice. Real-life design problems are frequently chaotic in nature, comprising several unknown, ambiguous, or even nonsensical parameters. For example, if you are designing a major operating system, do you actually think there's any way to define who your target users are? What designers are usually taught is that the first step to success is to define and analyze a problem at hand and define all its parameters. Then, try to devise their solution. This means that during the process of making sense out of ambiguity and nonsense, inevitably some information is irreversibly lost or misinterpreted. For example, a very effective mechanism that we often use in order to make sense out of nonsense is prejudice. A radically different approach is to acknowledge nonsense as an essential design feature instead of a flaw in the problem specification and seek to encompass it as part of the resulting solution. In this case, the outcome will be more like a constellation of solution constituents able to dynamically combine in order to form alternative solutions. So, my first design suggestion is, whenever possible, try to encompass nonsensical parameters as an integral part of your design. Sometimes, nonsense may also be part of the solution, like for example in the case of the Joker card. Quite often, we know less than we think we know. For example, if you believe that there are some things that you know like the palm of your hand, here's a quick test. Close your eyes for a second and try to think of your palm. Now open them and look at it. I'm sure that you will make some new discoveries. Sometimes knowledge may block our judgment. For example, when I presented this picture to 5 postgraduate students and asked them which one of the 2 yellow circles is bigger, they all answered that they are of the same size. When I asked them how they arrived to this conclusion, they all admitted that they were already familiar with similar optical illusions in the past. When I asked the same question to 5 young children, they all pointed to the right circle, which is the correct answer since it is 8% larger. Thus, the children's ignorance allowed them to be free from any bias and state an obvious truth. Ignorance may also allow us to achieve things considered as impossible. Maybe you don't know who this guy is, but there's a good chance that you have heard of his story. A student arrives late for a graduate-level statistics class and finds 2 problems written on the board. Mistaking them for a homework assignment, he writes them down, he goes back home, he struggles for a week and manages to solve them. Much later, he discovers that these were meant to be 2 examples of unsolved statistics problems. So, time for some practical advice. There are cases where ignorance may lead off the beaten path to innovation. Just because other people have done things a certain way in the past, it doesn't mean that it was the best or the right way to do it. My second design suggestion is to try to devise design solutions prior to seeking related expertise and knowledge. If you already possess such knowledge, you can always ask someone else who has not. Then, you can strive to identify innovative aspects by comparing them with previous work and assess their potential value and impact. Historically, there have been numerous cases where stupid ideas were deemed as intelligent and vice versa, even by people considered intellectually gifted. Aristotle, for example, in the history of animals, assumes that men have more teeth than women. Lord Kelvin, the great mathematician and physicist, in 1895 predicted that heavier-than-air flying machines are impossible to make, and Alexander Graham Bell spent about 30 years of his life and tens of thousands of dollars trying to successfully breed multi-nippled sheep based on the scientifically unsupported assumption that they would be more fertile. He even managed to publish a related paper in Science magazine. You see, the overall problem is that there is no reliable way to differentiate between an idea that seems to be stupid because it is groundbreaking or far ahead of its time, and an idea that sounds stupid simply because it truly is. But even in this case, there are people who have the exceptional ability to turn stupid ideas into great ones. Sadly, there are a lot more who can effortlessly achieve the opposite. Okay, time again for some practical advice. A suggested creativity tool is a stupidity fridge, where all stupid ideas can be collected, kept fresh, and without being able to contaminate others. Every now and then, or upon need, one can open each door and have a quick check to see if the time has come to defreeze some of its contents or simply to be inspired. My final design suggestion is to never totally dismiss an idea, your own or others, on the assumption that it is stupid. You can keep it in your stupidity refrigerator for future reference, as it may become of value as your design progresses or as technology, science, and society change. At this point, I should warn you that stupidity, ignorance, and nonsense constitute massive human powers that throughout human history have been used with catastrophic effects: wars, mass destructions, and environmental detriment. So please use them with great care. I should also strongly emphasize that this work does not suggest replacing other established and valued resources of creative thinking and design with stupidity, ignorance, and nonsense. Just like spice, they cannot be used to substitute the meal, and too much of them will eventually spoil it. In conclusion, what this work aims to communicate can be summarized in just 5 simple statements that I call the Axioms of Sin. First of all, there is no box, just thinking. Secondly, if you already know where you are going, then you are not going someplace new. Thirdly, it is a stupid idea, but it is an idea. Or, in other words, don't worry, be stupid. Fourthly, at least one of the axioms of sin is probably false, including this one. But most importantly, abba dabba, ooga booga, hoochie coochie, yabba dabba doo.
Come to the dark side.
We have cookies.